I'm going to start, yeah. I get the honor of starting with some basic housekeeping items just to keep us on track. So just as a reminder, we do continue to try to provide as much access as we can to our program management reviews. This is an event where people can watch. We are also being live casted, and that webcast of it is also recorded and will be available on the Census Bureau's website, on the 2020 website. So just be aware of that. 2020 census? Okay, thanks. I'd also point out that we are mic'd, so even when the mics don't appear to be on, because we are being webcasted, there are live mics throughout the room, so just be cognizant of that throughout the day as well. Also, I've been asked to remind you, and those of you that are speaking or will be asking questions, that in order to use the mic, you hit the red button to talk, hit the red button to, well, the button will turn red when you hit it. Turn it off when you're done. We can only have a couple of mics on at any given time or the whole thing goes haywire. So please do try to be cognizant of that, and we'll watch for that as well. Also, if you are going to ask a question, please do provide your name and your affiliation so that those listening or watching can have that information as well. In addition to being broadcasted internally over our ETV and webcasted, we're also live tweeting during the event. We started this with the last event, so if anybody likes to tweet, we encourage you to do so. Our hashtag is #2020Census, so please feel free to do that. And then the last reminder, or one of the last reminders I have before I get to pass the floor off for just a second, is that we do have legal requirements that we must follow. As you can see, we have a large room of people here, many of whom are Census Bureau employees, many are key stakeholders. We have many people that are interested in participating, but we do have legal requirements that we have to follow when talking with contractors or potential contractors. And Mike Polensky is just going to give us a few words of advice on that.
Hello, everyone. Since this is open webcast, it's being broadcast, and we're all here. We have contractors here. We have government employees here. We have a lot of oversight here. As part of this, since it is open, please limit discussions to those that are in attendance, both government and contractors. Limit discussions and questions and actually ask them during the PMR. Okay, and that's to benefit all of those that are not in attendance. Those that are not in attendance can't have those discussions, so just please limit those discussions. If you have questions, if you have issues, if you have comments, bring them up during the actual PMR so that everybody can benefit from that, so that there is no unequal access in a way to any information, okay? So that's it.
Okay. Thanks, Mike. A couple other reminders that I don't see anybody here that hasn't been here before, but for those of you that might not have been here before, the restrooms are down the hall and to the right, just in case you need to know that. We have emergency exits, so please do note them in case something does occur during the course of the day that we do need to evacuate the building. We will be taking a lunch break at approximately 12 o'clock. That's our plan. Depending on how the flow goes, it may be a little bit before that, it may be a little bit after that. We'll adjust the day. And we may shorten the lunch break depending on how long the morning sessions go. We do encourage questions during the PMR. This is a great opportunity to ask questions of our staff, of where we are with the program, and to really understand that. We do have a lot of information to convey today, but so due to some time limitations, we may take the question and then follow up offline. In the few PMRs I've been here, I really haven't seen that occur. We've been able to address them, but just note that if we do run out of time, we may move to that approach. We also have our email, which is always available for you to follow up with us after, and you know we do follow up with those Q&As that do come in offline. And then I did want to remind everyone that our next PMR is currently planned for Friday, July 10th. I wanted to point out one thing about this. One of the things we've gotten some feedback on about the PMRs, which is the length of the PMRs. We know these are very long days that we have. You'll notice this one's a little bit shorter, I think a half hour shorter than some of the previous ones. We're taking a hard look at the agenda and at our planning to see, given everything that's going on, if there's a way we can consolidate some of this into probably a half-day window. And so if you see a time change for the next PMR, that's what it's about. It's a recognition that these are long days in terms of the work we have to do, but they're also taking you away from the work you all need to do. So if we can find a way to shorten it, we will look at that. Of course, the agenda and the time length will always be respectful of the material that we need to cover. So we do want to be able to continue to be transparent and to share everything that we have to do, but we don't want to feel as if we're fixed into an all-day event. We want to afford ourselves that flexibility should that need arise. So for today's agenda, I'm going to do a quick update on the Decennial Census Directorate staffing, a little bit of an update on our reorganization related to that. We'll then review the current state of the 2020 census program. Then the staff will talk at length about our current testing activities, and we have many, many tests underway right now. It's a very exciting time for us. And then we will end the day with a discussion about LUCA. So I know many of you are interested in our local update of census addresses program, and this is a great point in the decade for that early planning and for us to really share with you where we are in that planning process. The organization chart in front of you, which hopefully you have on your slides, is just a reminder of our to-be organizational structure. A couple of things related to that. We have made a few changes to the alignment of that organization structure at its highest level. We didn't really change much except where some of the boxes report to, and so I did want to point that out for you. What we've done is streamline the internal versus sort of the internal facing work versus the external facing work as we looked at our organization structure. You'll notice that we have a number of vacant positions, so one thing I should probably say is that I am now the Associate Director for the Decennial Census Programs. I think I was acting the last time we were here, so I'm happy to share that with you all. I'm also happy to share with you that I'm actively working now on backfilling my old position of the Assistant Director position. So I'm very hopeful that we'll have someone in place shortly and we'll be able to move forward with that as well, because the program is moving at a very fast pace, and having the right staff in the right place at the right time is very critical to our ability to be successful on that. We've also had a number of new managers and staff join the Decennial Directorate since January. You know, I'm trying to look around to see who might have joined that I can point out. I don't think Jessica Graber was here at the last PMR, and she's over on your right-hand side. She's new to us. I think we might have announced her, but I don't think she had started yet. And she's over our Optimizing Self-Response area, our program manager for that. Rafael Corredo, who's at the table, is new since the last PMR. He is not new to census, having spent, I don't know, 20 some odd years in the economic directorate, and he's over our performance management and schedule area right now. I think Sherry was here last time. I'm looking down the table. This is the problem when you don't have a list, right? Who am I forgetting? So maybe those are who I see that are new in the room, so I'll stop with that. But we have had a number of new staff come on board, and we'll try to get that list out for you all if we can. And we're excited about that. In terms of our reorganization itself, just some quick accomplishments since the last program management review. We have submitted our package, our paperwork, to our Human Resources Division. That was done on schedule, so we're very excited about that. We have trained all of the managers, so the GS-14s and above, GS-13s also, I'm not sure. I think it was all the supervisors, 14s and above, on what we call a RACI, the Responsible, Accountable, Consulted, and Informed tables for how we'll operate in our new structure, as well as the concept of operations and documents for what the new offices and divisions, as well as our existing offices and divisions, will do. This was an important milestone for us because it meant that we're ready to move into implementation as soon as all of the approvals are in place. And we're still on schedule for that, for a spring implementation, so we're excited there. And I think with that, what I get to do now is turn it over to Deirdre, who is going to do some updates for us on the 2020 program. So thank you all.
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Before I get started, I'd like to ask you in joining me in congratulating Lisa on her promotion to the Associate Director for Decennial Census. Lisa and I have only worked together for a few months, but I trust and I know you know that we're in very good hands with her at the head of the Decennial Census. So congratulations, Lisa.
Thanks, Deirdre.
Okay. The title of my first slide is 2020 Census, Where Are We Today? Where are we today? As I mentioned, this is a critical year. In 2015, we're planning to conduct 5 tests. In November of 2014, we conducted a human-in-the-loop simulation. We call that a SIMEX. You heard about that from Stephanie Studs at the last PMR. We just completed our address validation test. That test had 2 components, a MAF model validation test and a partial block canvassing test. We're currently conducting the 2015 Optimizing Self-Response test in Savannah, Georgia, and a 2015 census test in Maricopa County, Arizona. And in the fall of this year, we'll conduct a 2015 National Content Test. In addition to all this testing, we're going to release our 2020 Census Operational Plan, announcing the major design decisions for the 2020 census. You'll hear more about that from Ann Wittenauer this morning. We're also going to begin our core programmatic work, such as the local update of census addresses. You'll hear about that from Brian Timko. And finally, we're going to continue defining and testing and preparing for the 2016 census test and our subsequent tests. In terms of program management updates, we have a few. We received our signed apportionment for fiscal year 15. We were relieved when that came through. We presented our 2016 President's Budget request in February of this year. And right now, we continue formulating our FY17 budget. In recognition of the fact that schedule is critical to the success of the 2020 census, we've assigned an assistant division chief for schedule and performance management. I'm delighted that Raphael is on board with us. He's the assistant division chief, and sitting next to him is Sherry Thorpe. She's our branch chief responsible for schedule. Over the past few months, we've conducted a thorough review of our 2020 schedule, and we've conducted a logical restructuring of the schedule. When I say that, I think it's important to stress that the content of the schedule has not changed. All of the lines are still in the schedule. However, we've done a careful analysis of the way we organize our tiers. We have 4 tiers in the 2020 census schedule, and Rafe and Sherry will talk with you about that this morning. Finally, we continue mitigating, monitoring our program level and project level risks. For FY16, we've added a new risk related to FY16 funding, as we do every year. This risk reads that in order to execute a 2020 census that reduce costs while maintaining quality, we need to receive the appropriate funding for the entire life cycle. If FY16 funding is less than requested, the Census Bureau may be forced to reconsider our key design decisions, and we will not be able to benefit as fully from subsequent research. Let's talk now about the status of our major cost-saving innovation tracks. As I mentioned, the first one is re-engineering address canvassing. You'll recall that the goal here is to reduce a nationwide in-field address canvassing operation. Instead, we plan to do much of the work that we used to do in the field, in the office, using new technology and new methodology to help identify new housing units and add those to our master address file and Tiger database. Over the past few months, we've been busy in this area. We completed the address validation test with both components, the math model validation test and the partial block canvassing test. We completed our 2020 census address canvassing business process models to help model the flow of activities from start to finish in terms of how we implement both in-office and in-field address canvassing. We've released a request for information on change detection. We're conducting market research to help us identify the available sources, processes, software, and related technologies to help detect change on the landscape, both in terms of structures, houses, and street center lines, roads. In addition, we've prepared a statement of work for a geospatial services request for proposal. This RFP will help determine the availability of commercial address and road data to help support a re-engineered address canvassing. Looking ahead, we're planning to complete our summary of responses to that change detection RFI. We'll release the geospatial services RFP. In May of this year, we'll release our address validation test report, identifying our findings from those tests. And finally, we'll develop a 2020 census address canvassing capability and solution requirements. Let's now turn to optimizing self-response. You'll recall that the goal here is to communicate the importance of the 2020 census to our population to help generate the largest possible self-response and to reduce the need to follow up with those non-responding housing units in the field. Again, we've been busy. We're in the process of conducting the Optimizing Self-Response test in Savannah, Georgia, that media market. Today you'll hear from Jessica Graber, Tasha Boone, and Frank McPhillips about the activities we have related to that test, but here are just a few highlights. On February 23rd, we began our Notify Me campaign. That's where we provided respondents with the opportunity to let us know how they'd like to be contacted when it's time to respond to the census test. They could opt for email or text. We began our advertising campaign on February 23rd as well, and it's quite extensive. You'll hear from Tasha about the details. We began self-response data collection on March 23rd. We sent our first reminder on March 27th, and on March 30th, we did see a bump in the response rates. Census Day was April 1st, and we'll continue with our activities. In regard to the national content test, we have submitted the OMB clearance package for review, and that's at the department for final approval. On to Brian next, hopefully. We released the request for information on both respondent validation, that is to help us know is the respondent who they say they are, and also for non-ID business processes to help us with matching and validating addresses that come in. Where are we going next? We'll complete our data collection for the Optimizing Self-Response Test at the end of May, by May 31st. We'll continue planning for our national content test. We'll evaluate the responses that come in for both of those RFIs related to respondent validation and non-ID business processing. We'll begin developing requirements for our 2020 Integrated Communications Contract. And finally, in April, we'll release the RFI on questionnaire assistance. We're conducting market research to help identify sources that can help provide assistance when respondents call in needing help during a census. Now let's turn to utilizing administrative records. The goal here is to use administrative records, that is information from federal and state governments, in addition to third-party data from commercial sources, to help reduce the non-response follow-up and to identify vacant units and to enumerate non-responding housing units. The last PMR, you heard from Marianne Chapin, Tom Muley, and a few others about the preliminary results related to the 2014 census test. We'll soon be releasing that report. There's 4 reports actually associated with the 2014 census test. Those are going through internal review now. Just a few reminders as to some of our findings from those tests. We found that encouraging people to respond via the internet, we call that our internet push strategy, it does work. We know that Compass, our application that we use on a handheld device to enumerate non-responding follow-up non-responding housing units, was also very successful. We had very little glitches in the field. And finally, we learned that we can reduce the number of non-response follow-up cases through the use of administrative records. Finally, let's talk about re-engineering field operations. This is one of our most significant cost drivers and cost savings categories. The goal here is to really use technology more efficiently, more effectively, to help manage tasks that traditionally have been conducted by humans. We're looking at reducing the field management structure. We're working with a sophisticated operational control system to help us manage the workload during non-response follow-up. And we're looking at ways to automate training instead of using those stacks of verbatim paper manuals that we have in the past. In terms of what we have going on, we have the 2015 census test right now in Maricopa County, Arizona. We opened the local census office in January 26th, and we've hired all of the field managers that will be working on that test. We began our self-response data collection, the same as the OSR test, on March 23rd. We sent our self-response reminder on March 27th, and with this test too, we saw a bump after that mailing. Census Day was April 1st. Looking ahead, we'll begin conducting our non-response follow-up operation on May 14th, and we're hiring enumerators for all 3 of our panels right now. Finally, we'll complete our non-response data collection by June 23rd of this year. That was a high-level summary of where we stand in terms of our 2020 census operations. As I mentioned earlier, you're going to hear about all of these activities as we progress through the day. We'll be happy to answer questions throughout the day as we proceed. Now I'd like to turn it over to Rafael Corrado. Should we ask? Okay, all right. So if you have any questions about the high-level summary, I'd be happy to take them now. Okay, I'm hoping that means it was clear. All right. And so once again, I am happy to turn it over to Raphael. We call Raphael Rafe in the office, if you hear me refer to him as that today. And Rafe's going to tell you about the work we've been doing to restructure our schedule. Thank you.
Thank you, Deirdre. Sherry and I are happy to be here to talk about the various aspects of the 2020 schedule, census schedule this morning. We're really going to talk about four main topics. Our re-engineered schedule concept. We're going to talk about, we're going to take a closer look at tiers 1 and 2 and the 2020 census life cycle chart and take a glimpse into our next steps. So let's dive into the next chart. We're going to spend a little bit of time on this one. What we're showing here is an example of our the tiered schedule concept. It's not a complete representation of 2020 census program elements or the timeline. It's just an example, an extract to show the relationships between the different levels of detail within the integrated program schedule. This chart is notional.
Just hang on for a second. We seem to be having some technical difficulties. Yeah, we're trying to figure that out. So they are working on it. We're going to try to start again and see if they can fix it while we go. I don't know. It's the best we can do. We are on it. Yes? Is that better? Can you hear me?
Maybe not.
Maybe not. This is why we don't have statisticians play with the microphones.
Exactly.
It's just a thought. So,
Can you
all right.
ask who can hear in the back?
Well, why don't we, I don't know if it matters from me, but why don't we do that from Ray? So,
Testing.
Ask who can hear.
Who can hear? Can everyone hear? I hear some feedback. Too
Is there any
close?
sound coming out of that?
Maybe.
I don't know. I'm a statistician.
I don't know. I don't want to touch anything.
let's give it a try.
Well, let's pick this back up with the chart you have before you. What we're showing here is an example of the tiered structure, tiered schedule concept. It's not a complete representation of 2020, but it's just an extract to show the relationships between different levels of detail and the integrated program schedule. This chart is notional, so we're going to walk through it a little bit. The tiered schedule concept is commonly used structure that serves a number of purposes. It visually separates information. It shows lower level schedules in relation to higher ones. It emphasizes important and significant events and activities. It shows driving activities and events based on lower tiers and related cause and effect relationships. And it provides additional means of executive reporting for diverse audiences and various stakeholders. In a nutshell, what we've done here is we've refined our approach to the tiered schedule development, better organizing and defining our activities and milestones. We've streamlined and focused our schedule activities to depict levels of importance, make the schedule more understandable and easier to track progress. We placed a renewed emphasis on managing to a fully integrated schedule, putting us in a position to manage our operations and programs more efficiently. To further explain Tier 1, it houses the most significant program milestones depicted by red stars, and you'll notice those throughout the materials you have before you. We'll take a look at Tier 1 milestones in more detail on the next slide. Tier 2 is at the operational level, likely driven by 2 or more activities from lower level tiers. Tier 2 includes our 34-2020 census operations and our census tests. Tier 3 contains sub-operations and components of those 34-2020 census operations and census tests, which also may be driven by 1 or more groupings of activities from Tier 4. Is that better? Seems louder, but is that better? Okay. So going back to Tier 3, it contains sub-operations and components of our 34-2020 census operations and our census tests. Better? Tier 3 may be driven by 1 or more groupings of activities from Tier 4. And Tier 4 contains the most detailed schedules and is governed by schedule policies and procedures. Tier 4 includes multi-project and integrated schedules. We're going to continue to employ a rolling wave schedule development process where near-term work is fully detailed and the outer years is planned at a high level and then detailed as we move forward, as the information becomes available. As you notice on the chart, schedule integration is both horizontal across Tier 4 activities and projects and vertical, depicting relationships to higher levels. And a practical example of the tiered concept can be applied to the address validation test, the yellow bars. You'll notice in Tier 3, the math model validation test, MMVT, and the partial block canvassing, PBC, are shown at the Tier 3 level. And the more detailed activities are shown at the Tier 4 level. Again, this chart is notional. All are housed under the Tier 2 activity for conducting the address validation test. And at any point in time, we can evaluate and measure program progress with a quick look at the higher levels and drill down into the details at the lower level. Our next slide, we look at Tier 1 program milestones in more detail. We're continuing to follow the best practices for schedule management based on the GAO Schedule Assessment Guide. Tier 1 illustrates the entire program lifecycle to our stakeholders through a set of significant milestones. These are points in time, events, and deliverables that provide a broad view of our program. We include in Tier 1 key program deliverables such as the operations plan and program milestones mandated by law, such as 2020 Census Day and the delivery of the apportionment counts to the President. These provide program-level measurement points driven by details at lower levels. To help us keep our program on track, they also help us keep the program on track by identifying potential slippage that might impact milestones. So those are Tier 1, the Tier 1 level. Next slide would be Tier 2. Tier 2 includes the 34-2020 census operations and all the tests, as I mentioned. It spans the entire 2020 census life cycle. And it is further decomposed into Tier 3 sub-operations and subsystems and Tier 4 detailed team schedules. The schedule I would like to note is integrated and baseline. The next 3 slides show an updated 2020 census life cycle chart. representing phases for research and testing, operational development, systems testing, and implementation. You should have a larger version, 11 by 17 version in your packet you can look at. And you've seen this before. This life cycle chart was updated and will continue to be updated as the program progresses through the decade. It includes information from various tiers in our schedule to represent program life cycle in more detail. We added more detail in the later years and refined some of the planned dates. We can take a closer look at the purple slide, and we can walk through that a little bit in a little bit more detail. You'll notice the program level milestones in Tier 1 are the red stars, such as delivering the 2020 questions to Congress, a legally mandated activity. Decision points and other significant milestones are green stars, like opening regional census centers. Research and testing milestones and activities are the blue triangles, and the purple diamonds are the execution milestones and activities. The next slide is the slide for implementation, and it contains more out-year activity, but as an example, we'll deliver apportionment accounts to the President on December 31st, 2020, which is a Tier 1 milestone denoted by the red star. So we try to keep that symbology through the documents. Okay, what are our next steps? We're going to continue to refine our Tier 3 as we complete the preliminary operations plan. We're developing integrated Tier 4 schedules for the upcoming census tests and the 2020 census operations. And we plan to embed professional scheduling staff into each 2020 census team to optimize detailed schedule development and control. We will continue to perform schedule monitoring and statusing on a weekly basis. So that is just at a high level a view of our activities, and I'd like to open it up for any questions that you might have. Yes, ma'am.
Tricia Durr from the Office of Inspector General. The schedule is built from the projects up and then the milestones down. Is that a fair statement?
Sure.
So the schedule is built, the detail level schedules are built on a rolling wave design. So as we find out more information about the operation, what we're testing, where we're going, we build those detail level schedules. The higher level schedules are built out all the way up to 2020. And again, as we find out more information, we continue to develop those schedules. So the detailed level schedules drive up to the higher level tier activities. Does that help? The source of the detailed schedules come from the teams. It's based on the scope of the work that we are performing at the time. Is that okay?
Sharon Vanucci, Office of Acquisition Management. Within your master schedule, IMS, do you show the dependencies? For instance, all of the systems that you're going to get and enable for SEDCAP and SEDSCI, are they linked in your master schedule?
Yeah.
Yes, they will be linked in the schedule. Up until this point, we haven't had a lot of SEDCAP systems, but as we move forward to 2016, those activities will be in the IMS, and so we will be able to, of course, monitor the schedule on a daily basis.
Thank you.
Ben Taylor, Office of Management and Budget. I was wondering sort of how risk in the schedule is sort of incorporated into the structure of how you have the tiers. You know, when one thing slips, how does that sort of cascade up and across? And I know there could be internal risks of delays and external risks of delays, and A lot of things have to be considered. So I was just wondering, it a little bit has to do with the linkages, but also just kind of how, is there padding built in? Is there, are there sort of kind of some prioritization in there? Or is it sort of something that when a shock happens, a delay, we just sort of look at everything all over again? Is there anything dynamic there?
So right now, if you look at this tier concept, and again, it's notional, but it does give you an idea of how the schedule is developed. So the relationships that we currently have, especially at the tier 4 level, do show us the impact of any delays. What we're going to do moving forward in 2016 is that we are going to include a risk analysis in our schedule so that we can see risk prior to it happening. What activities are actually potentially could cause us some issues. So we are going to definitely do that moving forward.
So would there be almost like a rating on different activities on something that could really cause ripple effects versus something that might be a little bit more isolated?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, absolutely.
How far along are you in building this? Are you up to date, or to what degree have you completed the work?
So we have schedules, high-level schedules through 2020, and we have built detail-level schedules up through the NCT test. We just baselined the NCT schedules on April 1st. And I would say next week, we are starting the 2016 schedule development as well.
If you have your schedules through 2020, then how come you only want to send OMB the schedule through 2015?
Are you talking about tier 1 and 2 schedules?
I'm talking
So
about
we
the,
do
I'm
have
talking about the Exhibit 300 business case. and
Oh,
the public
yes,
seats.
yes. So tier 1 and 2, they do come, and those are the high-level schedules. We only send the detailed information at this point internally. That will have to be something that Census will look into about any of the detailed level information. We have not received that request at this point.
It's not a request, it's the standing guidance from OMB to show the full life cycle to the extent it can be shown.
So we do currently send tier 1 and 2. We've been doing that on a regular basis. Matter of fact, we just did that this week.
Decennial had shown the schedule through 2016. When the revised schedule was made, now it's only going to be proposed through 2015. That's why I'm asking the question.
Okay.
Sure. We believe that we have been providing the Tier 1 and Tier 2 schedules on a regular basis, but we'll look into it. We can talk at the break, see if there's something else that you need that we're not providing.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions for Rafe and Tricia?
Schedule is really important, so I'm gonna. Yeah, the lowest level, tier 4, is multi-project, right? So you decide on how to. Can you give me like a hands-on, walk me through? And I know it's kind of on the fly, so, but just to give us more of a feel of, okay, you're meeting with the teams and you have to coordinate their activities, and one team relies on another team's, activities as well. How does that work? What's the mechanism?
It is an exercise. What we do is we meet with the teams. At the Tier 3 level, that's the program management level where the ADCs will manage the work. But at the Tier 4 is more of the detail level. So we meet with the teams. We find out their detail level activities. We create schedules individually, make sure that the relationships within the individual schedules are solid. Then we integrate across all the schedules. And that usually takes us about a week or two. That's the exercise we just performed over the last week. And so once we do those relationships, we fully integrate the schedule all the way up to the Tier 1 level, and then we baseline the schedule.
Can you just give me an example of real teams?
Let's see. It's so many. Oh, yeah, we can look at the MMVT and the partial block canvassing with the address validation. So there are some activities down at the Tier 4 level. For instance, when they listed the blocks and QC'd the blocks, that would be down at the very bottom in the Tier 4 activities. So those type of field activities that occurred, those activities were listed within the schedule. We integrated the individual schedules, then we integrated across, and those activities impacted or would show the impact to the higher level schedules.
So a team has like the date, they need the data from the test in, as a line item in the schedule, for example?
Right, for example, conducting quality assurance on or listing blocks, all of that is in the detail level schedule, when they're doing it, the begin date, the finish date, the actual date, the plan date, all of that is in the Tier 4 level schedule. And it is statused every single week.
Great. Ben?
Could you talk briefly about how schedule and performance are going to be linked going forward? Is that going to be more of a focus on performance measures?
Yes, part of the reason this stack, repeat the question, yes. Ben asked if schedule and performance are going to be more closely linked moving forward. This area used to be in the original plan for the reorganization. This area, budget, schedule, and performance management, fell within one assistant division chief area. As we studied the reorganization further, we realized that in order to be effective, in order to be successful, that was going to be too much for one assistant division chief to handle. Therefore, we separated it, we pulled it out. Now, Rafe is in charge of schedule performance measurement. Mike Perez, of course, as he has been over the past 20-some years, is in charge of budget. We recognize that we need to link all three of those, of course, moving forward in terms of our performance measures, our performance targets. We will be studying the linkages as we progress with development of the schedule and with those measures. Okay, in the interest of time, let's move to the next topic. I'm now happy to introduce Ann Wittenauer. She's going to be presenting an overview of our 2020 Census Operational Plan. In addition, Pat Cantwell will be talking a little bit about the microsimulator, which we're using to measure our cost-quality trade-offs in preparation for the release of that operational plan. Ann, over to you.
Thank you, Deirdre. I'm the lead for the team responsible for developing the 2020 Census Operational Plan. And as you heard at the last program management review, the operational plan will be released in October of this year. Much work has been done since I last briefed this audience. At that time, in January, I provided a description of the operational plan, which is really a set of documents. I talked about the makeup of our team, which is comprised of people from across this agency. I gave you a preliminary list of the operational and support areas that we're envisioning for the next census. And I gave you a few concrete examples with the help of my coworkers about what you can expect to see in the operational plan. And we used the local update of census addresses, address canvassing, and non-response follow-up to help you understand the things that will be included, either and the things that won't, because in some cases, our research has not yet begun, or in some cases, the research is ongoing. In today's update, I'm going to convey how our work has evolved over the past 3 months, weaving in several examples from Luca again. I'll also give you insights into 3 of our ongoing efforts that have helped us to mature our work. And then I'll turn the microphone over to Pat Cantwell, who will drill down into the 4th area, and perhaps the most important effort, since it pertains to the cost and quality analysis around our preliminary design decision. So in short, today, you're going to get a window into this work in progress. Let's get started. Next slide. Before giving you a glimpse into our activities of the last 3 months, let me provide, with this notional timeline, a bit of context for those who may be tuning in or joining us today, or who might need a refresher. As you heard from Deirdre, a week ago, April 1st, We hit the midway point between the 2010 census and the 2020 census, and we are now officially closer to 2020 operations and 2020 production than we are to 2010. This operational plan, or the first release of it, is actually bridging two critical phases in our life cycle. The formal research and test phase, which ends September 30th of this year, and the operational research and design build work that commences this year and rapidly crescendos in FY16. Most of the research and test work in our life cycle, as you know, culminates with the preliminary design decision. This is the centerpiece of our operational plan. As Deirdre explained earlier, the preliminary design focuses on 4 key strategies, as I like to think of them, because they are the biggest cost drivers: re-engineering address canvassing, optimizing self-response, utilizing administrative records, re-engineering field operations. With the combined potential cost savings of approximately $5 billion, these strategies have rightly been the focal points of our research and test work to date, and they will be heavily emphasized in our operational plan. We're going to document everything we know about these design areas, including the results where we have them from our fiscal year 15 testing. Bear in mind, 3 of the tests this year will directly inform the preliminary design decision. And 2 of them are occurring right now in Savannah, Georgia, and Maricopa, Arizona. But you'll hear much more about them later today. Of course, with this first version of the operational plan coming out a full 3 years before last decade's operational plan, there are things we cannot know at this time about the next census. And so the documentation in October will include questions, operational research, and testing activities that are still needed to mature the 2020 census design. To be clear, as you see on the right side of my notional timeline here, as fiscal year 15 winds down, we have 5 major activities ahead of us. First, as I mentioned, further research to operationalize what we learned during the research and test phase. Systems development and award of contracts for the systems that we will use in the census. Preparations for the operational readiness testing that will occur in 2018. Implementation of early operations like LUCA, and you'll hear a bit more about that in my presentation and even more this afternoon. And lastly, we'll be rolling out the management infrastructure and offices that are used for field work. So the 2 purposes of the operational plan, besides documenting our preliminary design decision, the second is to lay a foundation for the work that is needed in the coming years and to establish a baseline for the 2020 census program. Next slide. Now, one last quick refresher. We identified 3 elements or buckets of work, as I think of them, that will be included in the operational plan, and they're depicted here. The first component, the 2020 concept of operations, or CONOPS for short. It will be the core of the operational plan and the key element of the deliverable due this fall. Within the CONOPS, we're going to describe how we will execute the 2020 census, meaning we'll include our plans for implementing the 4 key design, implementing the preliminary design decision, including the 4 key design strategies, as you heard a minute ago. And in the CONOPS, we're also going to describe each of the 34 proposed operational and support areas that we've envisioned for the next census. The second bucket within our operational plan scope is to provide supporting documentation, and these we call our appendices. In January, I gave you a few quick examples, such as a detailed 2020 census life cycle cost estimate based on the preliminary design decision. That will be included in October, The IT architecture, the acquisition strategy for the 2020 census, to name just a few of the planned appendices in this set of documents. The last bucket consists of communication materials, and by this I'm referring to infographics and videos, the types of things that we would need as a program, because when you're dealing with something as complex as the decennial census, which is truly a program of programs, we're going to need materials to help us convey to our stakeholder community how we're planning to implement this major undertaking. Next slide. So on to the particulars of today's update. I'll show you how our ConOps portion has matured and evolved. In January, I explained the ConOps is going to include a description of each operational or support area. And for each of these 34 areas, we're planning to include key decisions, those made and those still to be made. We're going to include milestones related to when these decisions are needed. For example, if there are build-buy decisions. We're going to include the research that's been completed to date, and also that which is still required in the coming years. We're going to include information about the cost and quality trade-offs. What are the changes proposed for 2020 compared to 2010? And lastly, we intend to include a description of the IT capabilities that will be needed. All of this is conveyed on the left of this chart, and if we're doing a comparison, a then versus now, or a before and after photo, think of this side as the then, or the old photo. Now, on the right, you see how we have revised and expanded what the ConOps will contain, and this is our now, the new and improved, so to speak, ConOps. And the new content includes 4 things: a comparison of 2010 and 2020, a delineation that shows what's changed. Are there areas of innovation, or are we opting for a tried and true approach to minimize risk or expense? Knowledge management. What are the top 3 findings or lessons learned from the 2010 assessments for each operational or support area? I say top 3 only because the intent is just to highlight a few items in the ConOps and then to summarize them within an appendix. Otherwise, we would have hundreds of recommendations, and with our knowledge management database having well over 1,000 recommendations, we could do away with the database. So just a few highlights. Policy and legal. Are there any considerations on our radar that could affect us positively or negatively? And what do we need to do to take them into account? For example, GSA has a policy for reimbursing telephone or cell phone use. There is no government policy on data reimbursement. From a bring your own device perspective, we would need to work this out. Or alternatively, is there a legal mandate for the work, a just do it, if you will? And you'll hear about that in one of the examples coming up. Risks. What are the top 3 things, again, not the exhaustive list, that keep our project managers and operational leads awake at night? And what are we doing to mitigate them? Next slide. So what does this mean practically speaking? Let me give you a preview of what you'll see in our expanded ConOps using a concrete example from one of our 34 operations. We'll take LUCA. In our initial write-up, we included a description, very brief, as you see here, that the 2020 LUCA program will have many similarities to the 2010 LUCA, and that it will provide local, state, and tribal governments the opportunity to review addresses contained in the MAVTIGER database prior to the census. Additionally, we hope to streamline many aspects of LUCA to improve the experience and outcome for both the partners and the Census Bureau. In the initial write-up, we also documented decisions and working assumptions made to date. For example, as I said, LUCA will be simplified over the 2010 program, and it's going to be compatible with the Geographic Support Systems Initiative and address canvassing. In the initial write-up, we also cited completed research. So, for example, the R&D effort, the 2020 R&D staff evaluated old procedures through the LUCA Looking Back sub-team and conducted a series of focus groups for former LUCA participants to understand what worked, what didn't, and what suggestions participants had for the 2020 LUCA program. The research resulted in 12 recommendations. Now, in terms of proposed additional operational research, one of the things we noted in our first write-up, with these recommendations for LUCA, we're looking at the feasibility of several methodological and technological improvements needed to be evaluated in time for the LUCA program to be executed later in the decade, or actually starting in 2017 to be precise. We also documented cost quality, only our initial thoughts. Much work is still to be done here, but we had some initial measures such as production rate, in-office canvassing rates, and the cost of materials compared to 2010. Lastly, in the initial write-up, we wanted to include a reference to the IT capabilities, and we documented that the LUCA module for the GUP system would be needed in FY16, and that we would need systems to create LUCA materials for both digital and paper, again, also needed in FY16. So the point here, this slide shows you what our CONOPS looked like earlier this year for LUCA, and by extension, the 33 other operational and support areas. This is what I call the then slide, and on the following couple slides, you'll see how our thinking has evolved. Next. The more detailed or expanded CONOPS does three things. One, it distills the differences between 2010 and 2020. Third, it highlights, second, let's get the counting right. Second, it highlights a few of our project management best practices. And third, it puts the spotlight on any legal or policy considerations that could or will influence an operation. And what do I mean by that? Continuing with LUCA as an example, but I'll address this, but very quickly, so as not to steal any thunder from the afternoon presentation. Here you see a very brief, high-level juxtaposition or comparison of LUCA as it looked in 2010 and how it will look in 2020. And as I said, we expect LUCA, in this case, to be very similar to 2010, but it will be streamlined, compatible with GSSI and address canvassing. You also see extracts from the 2020 Census Program Knowledge Management Database. Again, the top three only for the sake of brevity. So what's the key takeaway from this chart? The points about LUCA are well taken. But the bigger point is this. The CONOPS portion of our operational plan will now have more clarity. For each of the 34 operational and support areas, anyone who picks up our documentation in October will know where we have innovated, where we've changed things for the better to make this census a 21st century census, either because of changes in our methodologies or with technology or both. Or they'll know that in some cases, we've determined it's more cost efficient or potentially less risky to have a tried and true approach. And secondly, when we're through this expanded CONOPS, where we are addressing the findings from the last census to improve upon any lessons learned, to avoid pitfalls, and to help achieve a more efficient and well-managed census. Next slide, please. This slide is another view of the expanded content, another slice at our now, if you will. Again, using LUCA as an illustration for what you'll see from all of the operational areas, we are including the considerations from both a legal and policy perspective that must be taken into account. In the case of LUCA, this program is actually mandated legally since 1994. So while we're responsible for implementing the operation, we don't have a choice to do it or not. This is good to know. It's not something we can put on the cost chopping block, if you will. You'll also see a couple examples of the risks that we're monitoring. Nothing too unusual here. The importance of testing, the need for help desk support to help local governments comply with our Title 13 requirements. And what's the point I'm making? It's not the particulars about LUCA per se, though I commend the project team. They have been very helpful to me and the rest of the operational plan team. The point here is you're getting a window into the ways our CONOPS has matured over the past couple months. And while it is good to see evidence that we are applying one of the key tenets of good project management to each operation, in this case risk management, I'd say, and I'm sure you agree, it's reassuring to know that we're thinking ahead and we're taking into account the possible game changers or worse, the showstoppers, and we're taking steps to mitigate them where we can for each and every operation or support area planned for the 2020 census. So moving on to the next slide. One last example of the expanded CONUPS. Obviously, schedule, as we all were talking a few minutes ago, must be included in any baseline, and we always intended to document the key milestones as indicated by the gray shading in the circle. Not to mention the fact that one of our appendices will be a pictorial representation of the high-level 2020 census program schedule. Go team. But now we have expanded the project level milestone information within the CONOPS, and we're going to show the entire operation, not just the relevant milestones for the early research and test work or the upcoming operational work. As an interesting side note, you see LUCA, one of the earliest operations, has an implementation actually beginning in 2017, which might be a bit of an eye-opener for those who are new to the census. 2020 census production actually begins 3 years before 2020. So you can see how with the more detailed CONOPS in our operational plan, this documentation is going to play a very vital role in communicating both externally and internally, timing at a high level for all of our operational and support areas. And given the very great degree of integration needed to successfully implement this census, this information will be very, very useful. So before we move on, let me recap the point of these slides again. With broad brush strokes, I've given you insights into the way we've progressed with the CONOPS using one operation, LUCA, to illustrate the iterative nature of our work. By adding comparisons to the 2020, by including key knowledge management recommendations, top risks, policy and legal considerations, and a broader summary view of the milestones within each operation, the CONOPS portion of our operational plan has become stronger. And rest assured, if you're hungry for more on LUCA, my colleague Brian Timko has plenty more of that this afternoon. Next slide. This slide may look familiar to those who participated in our January PMR or who got the materials online after the fact. Why am I sharing it again today? Well, it has changed, yes, slightly since January, but what's important about it for today's update is that it gives you a view of the breadth of the 2020 census program as we know it today. This chart shows all of the operational and support areas currently in scope for the 2020 census. And yes, there are still 34. In terms of the operational plan specifically, I'm happy to say we now have initial narratives for each of these 34 areas. Additionally, we also have initial write-ups for the 4 key design areas, as well as several key appendices. So using my then versus now comparison, in January we had a table of contents, and now we have initial documentation for 41 sections, albeit rough drafts and pre-decisional and in varying states of maturity, but the operational plan is under development. We've set internal deadlines for ourselves, and like our scheduled counterparts, are following, in our case, a sort of rolling wave approach, progressively elaborating the narratives as we get more information from the tests and other ongoing work. So by February 27th, we wanted rough drafts for 28 of the 41 sections. Now we're working towards a deadline at the end of April, where we'll get submissions for the balance of the operations, 13, plus additional appendices, and in May, we'll continue to mature and refine our work, working towards another internal deadline at the end of June. So what I've described to you is an iterative process of steadily developing, reviewing, and refining our initial documentation. And I'm proud to say we did meet that February 27 internal deadline. I fully anticipate you're going to hear more good news at our next PMR. This is truly the work of many hands, people throughout the decennial field, information technology, research and methodology, and communications directorates, most of whom you won't see at this table anytime soon, but who are on board and working hard to deliver a solid operational plan come October. So you might ask, what else has the operational plan team been up to? What other work have we been doing? Let me shed a little light in the next few slides. With this slide, you get a glimpse into one of our ongoing efforts intended to inform the preliminary design decision. and to help us mature it over the next few years. The 2020 Census Research Workshops, an initiative that has, I would say, organically emerged from conversations among our senior survey methodologists. We've had 4 to date, and these are for Census Bureau staff only. They're meant, in the simplest and purest terms, to help us communicate findings, spark ideas, challenge each other, and generally encourage dialogue. Let's take a closer look at one. On March 23rd, we pulled 20 to 30 people together for our Optimizing Self-Response workshop. We had a heavy mix of people from the Decennial and Research and Methodology directorates, and you can see the agenda on the right. We talked about the work related to partnerships, advertising, contact strategies, as well as the use of the internet as a self-response mode, real-time non-ID processing, and the 2015 census test work. How did this help? Let me give you one example using a project I'm familiar with, 2020 Questionnaire Assistance. This operation is one of several supporting our key design strategy to optimize self-response, which, as Deirdre mentioned, we have the potential to save upwards of $500 million. Now, Census Questionnaire Assistance, or CQA for short, this operation is preparing a request for information that will be released later in April, if our timing is on target, and will list some 35 capabilities that we'll be looking for industry to provide for the 2020 census. Everything from infrastructure, contact center technology, agents, contact center performance management, and so forth. It was very helpful for our CQA team lead to hear at the end of March what I would call a sort of holistic presentation on optimizing self-response, all about the testing efforts to date and the advertising. And in this way, we could validate that we had the right set of capabilities for this soon-to-be-released request for information. And of particular note, we found valuable the discussion about a potential workload driver for CQA triggered by the use of real-time non-ID processing in 2020, which is a different challenge than we had with this TQA operation in 2010. And as a quick aside, CQA, we're calling it here, and this is just a sidebar, we're calling it CQA this time, not TQA, because of the other channels that will be part of the scope, such as web chat, and therefore it's not appropriate to just call it telephone questionnaire assistance. But as you know, questionnaire assistance QA, that acronym's already been taken. So we've added the C, hence CQA. Now, that aside, these workshops, while still evolving in themselves, they were a success. Status was communicated, ideas and thoughts were exchanged. We intend to do more of these to inform the balance of the operational research and to share ideas, to foster more of the dialogue and communication needed to mature our census design. So next slide, please. Here's another window into work done by our team. Early content review sessions. We've had 4 to date in February and March, and a 5th and 6th are in the works for April and early May. These are closed-door sessions. They serve as murder boards of a sort, only a hair friendlier, if I do say so myself. And they usually last a good 4 hours, but any longer I'd be run out of town. Let me take you into for a closer look at one of them as an example to give you a glimpse of what these sessions consisted of. On March 20th, we sat down and had what I call IT Day. We looked for about, I'm getting tongue-tied. For 3 hours, we covered 6 topics: Service Center, IT infrastructure. These 2 portions are part of the ConOps. We talked about SEDCAP. We talked about SEDSci, which admittedly was more of an introduction since it is so new. We talked about the IT enterprise architecture, and we talked about the IT lifecycle cost estimates that we need to weave into our lifecycle, 2020 lifecycle cost estimates for the preliminary design. And sitting together at the table and around the room were our Chief Information Officer, our Deputy Chief Information Officer, IT program managers, project managers, all sitting down for an intensive dialogue with decennial leadership, with field leadership, and our other partnering directorates participating as well. We walked through the early iterations and engaged in some rather intensive, sometimes lively discussion. As a couple of examples, during our IT day, we were able to discuss and exchange information about the following sorts of things: ownership and accountability, timing of capabilities, user acceptance, differences in data collection between 2010 and 2020, and documenting. Documenting. We had folks on the keyboard capturing action items, comments, questions, and then handing those back to the contributing authors within 2 to 3 business days. Clearly, you can see we are applying a rigor to this work and being proactive about the deliverables due at the end of this fiscal year. But to me, the most exciting and important thing about these early content review sessions is they're promoting integration with the capital I, pulling together the partnering areas needed for the census, not to mention the 34 operational and support areas, and facilitating the exchange of information, clarifying roles and responsibilities, and providing constructive feedback. All of these things are essential if we are to effect a successful decennial census in 2020. Next window. In this slide, you see another ongoing effort. As I referenced with the Luca example, each of our operational and support areas has cataloged the decisions and assumptions their teams have made to date and the decisions that are still needed. Our operational plan team and the leadership group realized very quickly, after sitting through a second content review back in early February, that we had to get our arms around the mounting stack of decisions piling up faster than those February snows. Our answer was decision analysis and support. And what do I mean by this? First, we're going to document the decisions made for the 2020 census design by each operational area, and then we're going to validate them. We're going to catalog decisions as preliminary, final, or future. Where decisions are still needed, we're going to prioritize them. For example, do they inform the system requirements work needed by the end of this year? Do they have major cost quality impacts? Or are they in support of major acquisitions, those major ones within the next 12 months? We're going to prioritize our recommendations for leadership and give them this information within the time frame needed. We're going to leverage our existing governance and change management processes and then record all of this within the operational plan, and thus laying in a baseline for the program that we can use to plan, implement, monitor, and control the actual census. Now, this is a work in progress, and we're currently in the midst of working through the mechanics of this process. Let me give you just briefly a couple examples of the decision work and how it will help us to communicate and better manage upcoming activities. So, from field infrastructure, here are a couple preliminary decisions needed by the end of this calendar year. What will be the automated decennial field employee training approach for the 2020 census? We need to know that in December of this year. What will be the preliminary number of local census offices needed for the 2020 census? Again, that's needed in December of this year. What are the business requirements for the 6 regional census centers needed for the 2020 census, to include staffing estimates, updated budget models, and space requirements? Again, not December, but soon thereafter, in January. An example of a final decision, this one from address canvassing. We will implement a re-engineered address canvassing. And then a future decision, this one from our paper processing operation. Will paper data capture be a contingency for internet self-response and the use of handhelds in the non-response follow operation? And if so, how will we do this? Next slide. So I've saved what I call the best for last, perhaps the most important window into our work. As you heard earlier, the goal of our design for the 2020 census is to conduct the next census at a lower cost per housing unit, adjusted for inflation, than the 2010 census, and maintain high-quality results. I'm happy to say we now have a 5-member team focusing exclusively on developing quality metrics and using the microsimulator. I'm going to turn the presentation over now to my colleague, Pat Cantwell, who will discuss in detail the modeling and analysis supporting our cost-quality trade-off work.
Thank you, Ann. Good morning, all. While they're putting up the slides, let me just say I have two topics to cover. And this is evaluating cost and quality, and secondly, the microsimulator itself. Now, of course, the microsimulator is focused mainly on cost and quality, although it can measure a number of other things. So about 2/3 of what I present will be on the microsimulator. So on the next slide, let's talk about evaluating cost and quality. What we'd really like to be able to do is to say, suppose we have several competing design options. How do we compare them? It'd be nice to have one number, one measure of quality, which compares all of these design options. And same thing with cost. And this number would incorporate the downstream effects. These are the effects, we use this term downstream. For example, you have the first operation, and how does that affect the second and the third operations? And how do the first two operations affect all the subsequent operations? So that's what we'd like to have. But being more realistic, it's not so simple measuring cost or quality. As everybody knows, both are difficult to measure, and there's not just one way to do it. There are many, many methods. So first we have to identify appropriate metrics. On the next slide, let me start with quality. Measuring quality, I think of it with three different aspects. The first, what's the characteristic and aggregation, level of aggregation that you're interested in? We know that the total count of the population in the United States is a very important number, but so aren't the numbers for each of the 50 states in the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, as well as smaller geographic levels. Beyond that, we know there are demographic groups that are very important. For example, we have to have accurate numbers for the race categories, for Hispanic and non-Hispanic, for various age groups. Well, after we have all these various metrics, how do we combine them? We might have dozens, 100, 1,000 metrics. So how do we put them together? How do we put together, say, 51 state estimates, including District of Columbia? Well, this is something that's not new. The Census Bureau has worked at this for many years, and there's much in the literature, statistical and demographic. So that's not a problem in itself. The third aspect is the standard of comparison. What do we compare our results to? What's our proxy for the truth? And there's no one perfect method. For a lot of our work, we use a 2010 census because we have a lot of data on various operations and paradata as well. But census itself, as we know, has some errors in it between omissions, erroneous numerations, and other features. On the next slide, let's talk about cost. Okay. Whatever we do trying to measure cost, it has to be compatible with the Census Bureau's cost model and the cost estimates that they're producing. Now, for some of the operations, we can work with rough measures. For example, let's talk about the use of administrative records in the non-response follow-up operation. As a first order rough measure, we can use workload. Otherwise, one design might produce a certain workload for NRFU, whereas a second one, using more administrative records, might produce a smaller workload. Of course, we know that every case doesn't cost the same. So we may want to weight these by how much the cases cost in different areas of the country or whatever. We may start looking at more details, such as what are the number of visits. After all, a case is a case, but if we're looking at stopping rules in non-response follow-up, the number of visits is important. So as you can see, we have more and more data that we have to look through. Combining across operations, it's more difficult. For example, trying to compare measures of cost or quality across something like address canvassing and non-response follow-up. Dollars is always a good bottom line when you're talking about cost. Of course, dollars are also hard to attain at some points. There are other measures that we can put into the cost model, usually based upon productivity. For example, the number of cases per hour, the number of miles driven per case. Some of these are numbers that we can try to estimate. So on the next slide, just summarizing for cost and quality, or trying to measure cost and quality. First of all, we have to determine appropriate metrics. And there's no shortage of the number of metrics. It's a matter of narrowing the list, and specifically, though, which ones will answer the questions that we have to have answered. Also, which ones can we measure accurately? Now, I'm going to talk a little about two approaches that we're using to measure cost and quality, I think of them as analyzing components one at a time versus analyzing from beginning to end. And rather than defining it right here, it'll be easier to show you in the one of the subsequent slides. Okay, so let's talk about the microsimulator. This is a project that was originally directed by Dr. Tom Lewis, who put it on good, firm footing. So what is a microsimulator? A simulator is just a computer program that can run scenarios or options as we specify, while introducing randomness appropriately. Randomness which is realistic and reflects the operations that we're dealing with. Micro, I use this because we start at the level of the address or the housing unit, the person, the lowest level that we can get and work with, as opposed to another simulator which could work with, say, something like counties, places, or block groups, or tracts. The important thing is it allows us to run through the scenarios many times, many iterations in the simulation. So instead of just seeing an average result, we can look at a distribution of results. So we can say 80% of the results are above some value or below some value, whatever the metric might be. And those 20% beyond the value, is that something we can live with, or is it too much of a risk? On the next slide, the primary purpose of this microsimulator is to provide this information for the cost-quality trade-off. It's not the only thing that we try to measure in this, but that's the first purpose. So we'll use it to design shape the design decision that Ann's been talking about, this operational plan for 2020 census. It replaces our prior efforts on life cycle analysis by allowing us to build options from various activities, then try to assess the trade-offs. So let's look at some of the benefits of a microsimulator. On the next slide, we start off. First of all, it allows us to simulate actions or decisions. It'll come back up shortly. And then we can track it through a series of actions. So let me give you a picture. And this will be the next slide, slide 11. It's already up there. So first of all, don't worry if you can't see the small print. I can't read it either. I'm not sure what it says, actually. So it's a picture that's important. Think of each of these diamonds as a decision point or an action. So for example, the very top diamond might represent whether or not a housing unit responds via the internet or not. So the left-hand path might say, yes, it responds by the internet. The right-hand path, maybe it doesn't respond. And if it doesn't, then we have other options. Otherwise, perhaps responds by mail or not. And of course, we can incorporate options as we want. Now, each decision point, there are 2 or more possible paths. And the probability for each path is determined by a statistical model. This is based upon data that are available to us, such as from the last census, perhaps from administrative records, from the American Community Survey, or other sources. I want to mention that much of this modeling has been done by David Brown of the Center for Economic Studies. Okay, so you can see a picture right there. Now, actually, as you can imagine, the number of actions gets very long and large. So you can see the next slide. This is a picture from something that we've been putting together, which just reflects that there are many decision points and many resulting possibilities. So let's continue with the benefits of the microsimulator. On the next slide, you can see that we can combine a string of activities into one complete scenario or design option. Give you an example. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about 3 particular components: address canvassing, self-response, and the use or non-use of administrative records. And I'm just going to keep it simple here. In the first for address canvassing rather, we'll just look at 3 options according to what percentage of the work we'll do in the field versus what percentage of the work we'll do in the office. So these 3 options that you see here, 100% in field, 40% in field, or 20% in field. Self-response, okay, for both of these, we'll allow the internet and the mail. But then the question is do we allow a household to respond without a valid ID? So option 1 says non-ID processing is not allowed. Option 2, it is allowed. In the third component, use or non-use of administrative records, well, for all of these, we'll use them at least a little. And these are 3. You might have seen some of these before in prior meetings. And all three of these will allow the use of administrative records to identify vacant units. But the first one says, let's do it for vacants only. For option 2, which we call the hybrid approach, suppose we allow the use of administrative records for occupied units, but only after we try at least one visit, or exactly one visit. And for the third one, the third approach, the full approach, we'll use administrative records if they're deemed to be good, even before a visit. On the next slide, you see how we build a scenario. So from each of the three components, we select an option. Okay. For this particular, I call it scenario A. Suppose we select the ADCAN option of 20% in the field, 80% in the office. For self-response, we allow non-ID processing. And for ADREX, we use the hybrid approach. So we've built a scenario. So now you look at the next slide, benefits of a microsimulator. It allows us to compare two or more scenarios. So now continuing, I'm going to build a second scenario right below. Okay, on the next slide, you'll see that the top half is the scenario we just built called the hybrid approach. I call it hybrid because I'm focusing on the administrative records. Now I'm going to build a second approach, a scenario B, and we're going to use the same thing for address canvassing, the same. We're going to allow non-ID processing, but we'll select a different option for administrative records. So if you look at the title of the slide, Analyzing Components One at a Time. I refer to this because we're really talking about the use of administrative records if we could hold everything else fixed. The idea of all other things being equal, which in real life they never are. But here we're trying to keep as much as possible fixed while we look at the administrative records component, but still bring down what happened before you get into administrative records. So here we can compare the hybrid approach versus the full approach. Now on the next slide, titled Analyzing from Beginning to End, there's no reason why we have to fix the others. And realistically, we may want to change some of the options that we're comparing. So for instance, I've built a new scenario C. I call it the conservative approach because I'm going to pick the most conservative option from each of these three. I'm going to pick the 100% canvassing in the field. I'm not going to allow non-ID processing, and we're going to allow administrative records, but used only for vacants. So scenario C, conservative approach, versus scenario B, which you've already seen up above, which is more aggressive. And so I can compare two different options that don't fix anything in particular. Okay. We'll finally get to the last of these benefits of a microsimulator slide. The fourth and fifth bullets, we can observe the trade-off between, say, cost and quality, or as I said, we can measure other characteristics as well. In the fifth, we can capture the randomness starting at the household level, or address level, and see how this produces different aggregate results. On the next slide, now again, please ignore the small writing. Just the important point is to look at the results where each dot represents one iteration of the simulator. So for example, I just have a green option and an orange option. They don't mean anything. This is just made up data. And so the green option, if you can see clearly, I'm not quite sure if you can see, is more to the left, the orange option more to the right. And if we have an x-axis, perhaps that measures quality, a y-axis that measures cost, each dot representing one iteration. So we have 30 simulations of each of the two options, the green and the orange. What one could see from this is that the orange option tends to produce higher quality. Not for every iteration, but it tends to in its distribution. Cost on the y-axis is not so clear. There's much more overlap here. So it gives you an idea of what could happen between two closely competing options. Okay, now being realistic, let's look at the limitations of a microsimulator. First of all, the results are only as good as the models and the input data. This is true of any statistical model, of course, and we always say this, but we have to go in realizing this. Second, the results rely on the validity of the assumptions. Third, it takes time to develop, to test, and to program all these underlying models in all these scenarios. Because there's a lot of complex work going into this. Fourth, the computing time to run the simulation, at least to this point, can be quite long. So we're working on this, trying to bring it down to shorter time lengths. Okay. I'm going to talk about benefits of this particular microsimulator. And I'll just go on to the next slide, which is number 1, building scenarios graphically. So first of all, when we want to build a new scenario, especially when we already have one to start with, for example, there's a picture over to the right. Suppose you look at that lower right-hand green diamond, and we want to take that diamond and say, I want to add or insert 1 or 2 additional options. Well, what we do is we can deal graphically. All this is on a graphical interface, so we can deal graphically and insert the new options there, and the Python code is generated automatically underneath. So we don't have to change the code ourselves. So this is simpler to build and change. It also increases the coding accuracy because instead of looking at inserting the code and making sure everything's working properly, we can see how it looks right in front of us on the graphical interface. The second one, we can change the input parameters very easily. So for example, in our models, in our work, we produce probability. So for example, for each different housing unit, we have a probability that the unit responds via the internet or that it has good administrative records. Now suppose over all the housing units in the entire country, the average internet response based upon our inputs is, say, 50%. And we want to see what happens if we increase that to 55%. It's very easy just to add that 5%, making sure we don't go over 100 in the models, but to add that 5% into the probability. And in fact, we can do it just for a subset of the models. So for instance, if we wanted to say, let's suppose that the internet response is increased by, say, 10% just in, say, urban areas. We can do that very easily. And then we can see the results. Okay. The third, we can explore the results visually. And it's very easy to work with our dashboard. Once we have the different aggregates that we want, or characteristics that we want programmed, we can pick out as whatever we want. So if we have all the 50 states in there, or 51 including DC, we can just put a check on all the states that we want to see and put them in and look at their results together. Or we can check them separately and look at them separately. Or we can say which housing units use administrative records, which ones didn't, and let's look at the average cost and average quality. So on the next slide, let me just give you a brief update on the current state of the simulator. We've developed 2 major activities, the self-response activities and the use or non-use of administrative records, also for some parts, numbers of visits. We're working on address canvassing. We have that partly done in one of our codings, and we're working on it in the others. I say in one of our codings, in the third bullet, we're programming this in 2 different languages. We have it in the iterations part of it. We have the Python and in SAS. This is for verification and to mitigate any risk. So finally, let me just summarize by saying this year, we're working with this microsimulator to help us evaluate or assess the cost, quality, and other characteristics of the census operations. Beyond this fiscal year, we want to add other operations, refine the models, and look at other options. And finally, we'd like to share this software with other parts of the Bureau as they're interested, whatever they can use in this. So I'm going to turn it back over to Ann. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat. So to wrap up the update on the operational plan, using Luca as an example, you learned how the ConOps portion of our operational plan has matured and expanded. You learned about workshops and review sessions intended to communicate information and ensure a quality deliverable in October. You heard about our work to inventory and document the decisions that support our preliminary census design and that to provide proper visibility, there I go again, proper visibility for our leadership on the decisions needed and within the next 12 months. And lastly, thanks to Pat, you heard about the critical efforts underway to support our cost quality analysis. Looking ahead for the next few months, there will be more work on the decisions task and at least 2 or more early review sessions. Farther downstream, on September 30th of 2015, we will baseline version 1 of the 2020 Census Operational Plan, and then we'll brief it here at the October Program Management Review. In subsequent years, we'll be updating this operational plan, since not all research questions can be answered by September of this year, nor can all the related decisions be made by that time. In fact, it's important to note that the final version of the operational plan won't be released most likely until after the apportionment and redistricting counts have been released, to reflect not just what we planned, but what we actually did for the 2020 census. And which means we'll be handling a lot of revisions by change management and governance, and keeping you, our stakeholders, informed along the way. After this morning's window into our work, I hope that you are assured we are taking our work very seriously and applying appropriate rigor to the operational plan and its centerpiece, the preliminary design decision, the associated CONOPS, and the supporting materials. Our documentation, albeit pre-decisional and still very much a work in progress, is taking shape. More importantly, to my way of thinking, this work highlights the integration with the capital I that is underway. We are proactively bringing together people, research results, and ideas to make not only our documentation, the operational plan, a success, but the next census as well. Are there any questions? Dan?
Dan Cork, National Research Council. I have a battery for all of the speakers from the morning, if I could. A mix of picky points and things that caught my eye. First picky point, you raised Luca as an example. I know we'll talk about Luca later on, but little verbs are important. In the very short form description of Luca, the thing that's carried over from the initial CONOP slide in there, it just makes reference to it being a program for reviewing, the local government's reviewing address list, and that's it. I'd lobby for adding in something a little bit more active than just the passive review, to review and update, or review and suggest corrections. The further picky point on that, it mentions on the policy and legal considerations, it has to conform with what's in the law, the Address List Improvement Act. It also has to conform with the appeals process that's set up offline, that's anticipated by the law or whatnot, but that's on a separate calendar. The master schedule here lists one-time November 16 OMB clearance for 2020 Luca as a whole. Does that anticipate specification of the appeals process at that time too?
Your points are well noted, Dan.
On the life cycle chart, relatively few of the things have beginnings and end dates specified. Those that do are a little bit interesting. There's one just seems to be a little misaligned, maybe on page 2. Determine locations for regional census centers. Maybe that's an 18-month activity. I think it's supposed to be an 8-month. If it's actually going from 10/16 to 6/17, the starting point should be October 16 or yeah. Yeah.
I just want to clarify, Dan, you're currently talking about the re-engineered schedule tier concept slide, or are you on a different slide?
I'm on page
On the
2 of the
detailed chart.
large slide. The upper left corner just says 10/16 as the start date, pegged to what looks to be the start of FY 16, which would be 10/15, wouldn't it? It has a beginning date of 10/16 and an end date of 6/17.
Right,
which would
that's
be
correct.
8-month process, but that looks to be spanning more than a year. Which is, yeah, just,
Yeah.
it just needs a,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah.
slide
We'll take,
forward
I
to-
see what you're saying. We'll
but
take a look at that.
Even,
Thank you.
even with that, just the realism. Obviously, the number of parameters about the number of regional centers, the regional number of local offices still has to be sorted out, but this schedule suggests an 8-month process for determining the locations of the relatively fewer number of regional centers, culminating immediately in signed leases, and looks to be 6 months later actually opening the RCCs. It's a more compressed time frame for the, hopefully not 500, but still a larger number of local offices, which is a 6-month location process, signed leases, and opening 3 months after that process. Is that realistic? Is that sort of factoring in additional horsepower or whatnot that would be needed at the regional level versus the local?
Dan, those are great points, but I think a lot, and we're happy to talk about them. I think it would be easiest to talk about them at a later point with the detailed schedule. I think what you're pulling out of here is the challenge we have anytime we take a schedule that's this thick and condense it into a graphical illustration. The points are good, and we'll certainly look at them and see how we can convey things a little bit more clearly. But the schedule that's passed out, the swim lane version, is really meant to provide key it's not meant to be the working schedule. It's meant to be an illustrative schedule of the key areas that we work through. But these are very, very valid points.
And I just raised it as just a picky point, just so that, again, specifying a smaller number of sites taking longer than a larger number of sites just struck me as a little bit odd. Likewise, the 1017 refined estimate of AC workload in 2017, that's on page 2. That's basically fine-tuning the top level, what you can do in office, what you can do in field in 2020 as opposed to in 27. Okay. For Pat on the micro simulator, you talked just a little bit about how cost factors into the model. Is it assumed to be a fixed cost that's associated with something like a contact attempt for a mailing, sort of discounting a second mailing or second contact attempts?
Right.
Is that allowed to vary by geography or allowed to vary more randomly?
This is allowed to vary, actually, you heard the question. This is allowed to vary actually all the way down to the housing unit. Now, of course, different housing units have different probabilities based upon their models. So for one housing unit, it may be very, very likely that they're going to respond a certain way, perhaps based upon the characteristics and other variables that go into the model. But yeah, it can vary all the way down to the housing unit level.
So the cost could vary by the propensity to respond, or?
Yes.
Okay.
Sure, yes.
Brian Harris-Coteen, Office of Management and Budget. To pick up on the micro simulator, Pat or Tom, I think is still in the back too. So this is really cool. Glad to see that you guys are doing this. It sounds like there's a lot of flexibility in this, and I guess I just wanted to probe that a little bit further to see. So you noted very well that there's assumptions that are built into the model, especially like relationship. I'm thinking of relationships among activities. Now there's some things that are naturally related. If people don't, respond via internet, then we can, send them paper reminders. So there's natural connections there, but there's less clear connections between, well, how good is our address canvassing? Does that impact upon self-response? And so I didn't know if you have built into this so that you can look at, adjust parameters for those kinds of things, or are you hard coding some of the relationships? Or I'll turn this off and then you can respond, Pat.
Oh, thank you. Yes, what we're doing in this, it's a very good point to bring out here. For instance, your example, address canvassing. If a certain unit happened to be missed on the master address, according to our simulation, if the unit is missed in the address canvassing, and then it cannot receive a mail out. Well, this is if it's not on the list in the first place, and then that block is not in the infield canvassing, but we may capture it in the in-office canvassing. So if it were missed in both, then it couldn't receive a mail out. Okay, so, and your point's a good one in that a lot of this is difficult because some things are fairly straightforward. If this happens, this has to happen, or this happens, we have to assign a probability. For other cases, it's very difficult. For example, the in-office address canvassing. How do we assess different probabilities, what's going to happen with that? And those are things that we're going through right now through discussions and working with the experts here to try to assign probabilities for the models.
So Pat, maybe this is Tom Lewis, maybe one additional comment. Another feature, let's say advantage of the microsimulator, sometimes called agent-based model, is that you endow the agent, in this case the households, with attributes including probabilities of responding and all those other things. And that induces these joint distributions that you might otherwise have to sort of sit there and think about how to make those relations. So you make them at the micro level and make them, again, with a different set of things. And those induce what, at least Brian, I think part of what you're asking is how do you get joint relations? You get them by having it build up from the smallest molar unit. And that doesn't mean it's magically correct, but at least you get to discuss it at that level.
Right, and I think that's really key here in terms of understanding, because you've had it, even with a couple hundred years plus of experience doing decennial censuses, we don't have a lot of experimental manipulations even in the tests that you're doing on all the different possible combinations here and what the relationships are among some of these different characteristics. And so being able to talk about those or model those, or just at least do some sensitivity analyses around some of those things, I think and be able to talk about how confident we are, or what examining the assumptions, not just simply saying, well, we had to assume this, but we actually have, this is Tom and Ron's best guess, and that's better than most, but.
And maybe I agree, and one more quick comment and I'll stop, but as with microsimulators used for disease spread and disease control, in fact very popular now with Ebola and so on, you have to, especially if they have very visually attractive graphical output, which this one has and others, you have to just keep reminding yourself not to reify this, that it really isn't the truth, but you're at least trying to study implications of assumptions.
I'd like to see if there's one more question, and then we'll move forward with our break to keep on schedule. Tricia.
I have a kind of a high-level question, I think. And thank you for the presentations. I like the concrete examples, always kind of help picture things. The amounts of savings that each of these research, group areas would you call those a goal? And if so, is that a goal that's attached to this preliminary decision milestone? Are there other goals with each of the milestones? And okay, yeah.
So I can try to answer that question and tell me if I'm on track. The estimated $5 billion in savings was based on preliminary life cycle cost estimates that we prepared as part of our out-year budget estimates. Those estimates were based on a number of inputs, variables, parameters, using experience from the 2010 census, what we knew from testing that had already occurred, and what we knew from expert opinion within the office. As we conduct each test, we're building on and refining our parameters to revise our life cycle cost estimates. When we release the 2020 Census Operational Plan at the start of the next fiscal year, those numbers will be revised. However, we are moving forward using that as our baseline estimate.
So, like, Ann's, operations concept.
Remember when we talked about the path to the 2020 census design decision, and we outlined the assumptions that we used to build our program moving forward? Those same assumptions were built into the life cycle cost estimates. We had key questions that we discussed during the October PMR. We've been working to answer those key questions over the past few months, and flesh those out as part of the CONOPS or the operational plan. All that's coming together to refine not only our concept of operation, but the life cycle cost estimates.
Let me pause for a second and try to take a different approach with the same information in a way. When we set out a few years ago for the initial planning of the 2020 census and really sat down and said to answer the question, we were charged with a directive to find a way to take the 2020 census at a reduced cost. And we sat down and said, what do we need to do from a design perspective? And that design perspective is what drove those initial life cycle cost estimates, so the first iteration that we put out, and then the second iteration that we put out last year of the life cycle cost estimate, which is what gave us that estimated $5 billion in savings in those key areas. From there, we built our research and testing around it, or modified the early plans for research and testing to fall in alignment, so we could either prove in, validate, or determine what the methodological approaches would be to further refine it. And so as we move closer with the preliminary documentation, with the operational plan that we're releasing we're developing by the end of this year and we'll be releasing early next fiscal year, that lays the foundation for how we're incorporating all of that research and testing around the ideas for the design that we had to bring it in line with the cost savings that we felt we needed to achieve and that we could achieve. Does that help in terms of the picture?
Yeah, so those numbers will vary, right? You know, next PMR, well, you know, based on this test, okay.
So we haven't, so we've rerun that life cycle, the preliminary life cycle cost estimate a couple of times. We did it the first time we released that information. We reran it a second time. The rerun that we most recently did on it, which was several months ago, was to realign, and you might remember the evolution of this. When Burton first shared sort of how we thought and what the high-level items would be that we were looking at, there were 9 areas that we were looking at. It was like A through G or something like that on a spreadsheet. When we redid it, we took all of those same ideas, and there's over 100 parameters that feed this model. But we took all those same ideas and put them into the 4 innovation areas where we felt they most applied, knowing that some could cut across areas. And there were slight changes, although the numbers came out pretty consistent. It was really rounding error when you looked at it. When we redo it the next time, it will be based on the information that we learn, and we're already learning things. For example, and this is an illustrative example. I don't have something real in front of me. But for example, should we say we can do 25% address canvassing infield? We want to do 25% infield address canvassing. The estimate, I believe, that we had in one of the initial runs was 20%. So that would vary that projected cost savings. But we might find in the 15 tests that we're running in Maricopa that we have more productivity through the use of Mojo, our enhanced operational control system that we were estimating. So the net impact will vary, and those numbers that come out will vary.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'd like to take a break now. Let's reconvene. I'm looking up at 3 different clocks, and they all say a slightly different time, so I'm going to look at my phone here. It's 10:58. Let's get back together at 11:15, and we'll move forward with the next set of presentations. Thank you.